One September afternoon in Taiwan, a young man boarded a public bus for what he thought would be just an ordinary ride home. But it wasn't that. This ride would turn out to be the single most terrifying experience of this guy's life. And we don't just have to take his word for it, because this young man managed to capture a photo of the thing that was terrorizing him on this bus for hours. And so, no matter what you think of the story, the picture is fascinating. So make sure you stick around till the end to see that photo. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, on garbage collection day, wake up really early, go to the Like Button's house, and take their full trash cans away from the curb and put them back in their yard, wait for the garbage trucks to come by, and then after they're gone, wheel the Like Button's garbage bins back out to the curb. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of September 4th, 2017, a young man named Zhu rushed through a bus station in southern Taiwan. Zhu's bus home to the capital city, Taipei, would be leaving any minute now, and because Zhu was running late, he knew the bus would be packed and he would get a terrible seat. And so Zhu just kept on running as fast as he could, and he finally saw his bus parked up against the curb on the outside of this bus station, and he ran up to it, totally winded, but glad that he hadn't missed his bus. And so the driver noticed Zhu standing there, and so he opened up the bus doors, and Zhu went on board, handed the driver his ticket, and the driver said, okay, take your seat. And Zhu turned, and he began walking down the aisle, and at first he almost didn't register the weirdness of the inside of this bus. I mean, he took this route all the time, and he was totally expecting this bus to be packed, but as he was walking down the aisle, he realized he was the only one on the bus. There was literally nobody else. It was just Zhu and the driver. And so for a second, Zhu thought maybe he had made a mistake and this was not his bus, but he checked his watch and, again, he had taken this bus many times and he knew this was it. And so he was about to turn and maybe ask the bus driver, but the bus driver shut the doors, turned on the engine, and began to pull away. And so Zhu just thought, well, I guess it's just my lucky day. I have the bus to myself. This is crazy. And so Zhu found a seat towards the front of the bus, and after sitting down and kind of getting situated, he just sat there and stared out the window as the driver, merged into traffic and eventually found their way onto the highway. And as they were just coasting along, Zhu really felt content. I mean, it really felt like he had this private ride all to himself, and this was not a short bus ride. It was like a 6-hour bus ride. And so the idea of just having peace and calm the whole time, I mean, that was so luxurious and unexpected. And so Zhu was just having a wonderful time, just kind of taking it all in, when all of a sudden he hears a woman coughing behind him. And remember, he's scanned the bus. It's empty. And so he whipped his head around, totally startled, like maybe there was somebody on the bus, but he looked behind him and there was no one. And so very quickly, Zhu began to rationalize what he had just heard. He's looking around thinking, okay, one of the windows is slightly open. Maybe the wind was coming in weird and causing a sound, or maybe it wasn't behind me. Maybe that cough came from the driver and somehow I thought it was back here. Zhu's telling himself that that wasn't really a woman coughing because there's nobody here. And so before long, Zhu convinced himself that, that was just an anomaly. It was nothing to worry about. And he was back to just relaxing and enjoying this peaceful ride. And pretty soon after that, he began to drift off to sleep. A few hours later, Zhu woke up and he was very groggy and he looked out the window and saw it was dark and he checked his watch and saw they were maybe about halfway to their destination. And then he looked at his phone and saw he had a text message from the friend he had just been visiting, the friend he had been with before he left and got on this bus. And the friend was basically asking Zhu how the ride home was going. And Zhu, he wrote back and said, you won't believe this. I'm on a bus that's completely empty. Like I have the bus to myself. And this friend, who was familiar with how packed this particular ride to Taipei was like, no way, that bus is never not filled with people. You gotta send me proof. And so Zhu opened the camera on his phone, he turned around, and he snapped a photo of the back of the bus. But when he looked at the photo he had taken, it was very grainy, and there wasn't any light in the bus, and there wasn't a flash on his phone. And so instead, Zhu, who happened to be a semi-professional photographer, he pulled out his really nice high-quality digital camera out of his bag, and with that camera, he turned around and took a photo. But when Zhu looked at the photo he had just taken, he thought there was something wrong with it. And so he zoomed in on the photo and He couldn't believe what he was looking at, and so he checked all the settings of his camera and checked the lens to make sure everything was working properly, and it was. And so, starting to get kind of scared, Zhu put the camera down and walked to the back of the bus and walked up and down a couple of times, looking for some explanation of what was in that photo. But there was no explanation, and so now feeling really scared, Zhu went back to his seat, grabbed his phone to text his friend to be like, look what I found, but his phone was dead. Even though his phone had full battery like a minute ago, now his phone doesn't work, and he can't turn it back on. And so Zhu's thinking, what do I do? Do I tell the bus driver about this photo? But he was worried if he showed the driver, it would be so startling that the driver might crash the bus. And so Zhu really felt completely alone and terrified, and he just placed his camera next to him and then just closed his eyes and began silently praying that he would get off this bus. But as he was doing that, he began to hear whispering right behind him, like numerous people whispering right behind him. And he whipped his head around, but again, there's nobody there. And so now, the fear is only getting more and more heightened inside of Zhu. He goes back to praying, and now, in addition to the whispers behind him, he starts to hear the sound of seats basically creaking as if somebody's sitting in them, kind of rocking back and forth. And now Zhu, he's too scared.
I spooked you. Okay, you know what? I'll just talk. I'll just talk. Oh. It's just been such a... If I can't talk properly, it's because I've been talking for days now. But I'm gonna try and focus on art.
Completely oblivious to what was happening inside of this bus. And so Zhu is horrified, has no idea what to do. These noises are not stopping despite the fact that nobody else is on this bus.
Take that pin off. Unpin it. I need to make a new pin. I watch Mr. Ballin.
When the bus stopped, Zhu unplugged his ears, opened his eyes, expecting to hear all these whispers and sounds, but the bus sounded totally quiet and normal. And the bus driver, was kind of going through the shutdown procedures of the bus. And so Zhu was feeling totally relieved here, and he couldn't wait to get off.
There we go. Ah, she speaks. Yeah, I can't hold back.
Walking towards the front of the bus, but before Zhu got
there we
off the
go.
bus, sweating profusely, his skin was flushed, he looked like something bad had just happened to him. And he asked Zhu, hey, are you okay? And Zhu was about to be like, oh no, everything's fine, and just kind of get off the bus. But then he thought to himself, I have no explanation for what just happened, and that was horrifying. I don't know what that was. He took this photo that I can't explain too, that seems definitely connected to all the noises I just heard. And now that the bus has stopped, there's no risk of showing the driver and risking scaring him so badly that he'll crash. And so Zhu thought, you know what, even if it makes me look crazy, I'm going to show the driver this photo and see what he thinks. So Zhu was like, actually, let me show you something. So he pulls out his camera and he shows the driver the photo. And as the driver is kind of looking at the photo, not really sure what to look for, Zhu, he reaches down and he zooms in on the top half of the photo, and it expands the ceiling of the back of the bus. And you can very clearly see there is a huge human arm and hand
What the hell?
extending off the ceiling, like it's reaching down into the bus. And so as the bus driver is studying this arm and hand, Zhu is saying, I thought for a second that could have been me, reflected off the ceiling or something, but I was holding the camera in my hand, and so wouldn't the camera be in the reflection? If that's my arm, wouldn't the camera be visible? Because it's not. And then Zhu also was like, I thought for a second maybe it was your arm, but you're driving the bus. Your hands are on the steering wheel. And so if this arm is your hand, wouldn't the steering wheel be in the reflection? Like, I don't understand how there's an arm with nothing in the hand reaching down from the ceiling. And then Zhu also told the driver that in addition to this totally terrifying photo of this ghost arm coming off the ceiling, there were all these weird whispers and sounds and noises behind him for the whole ride. Like, it was horrifying. And so after Zhu has detailed to this bus driver that basically...
You three-shotted mom? God damn.
Zhu is expecting the driver to have a pretty big reaction to this.
Easy W right there.
Pretty big news here. But the driver just handed the camera back to Zhu and basically turned to Zhu and said, you know what? You can't show this photo to anybody. Like, no one can know about what happens on this bus. Because if they find out, it'll ruin my business. And Zhu's thinking, wait a minute, does this mean the bus is haunted? Is that what the bus driver is confirming here? He doesn't seem shocked. He seems like this is completely routine. This is what happens on his bus. And Zhu was about to protest and be like, are you
It's a bit tad quiet. It's probably because I'm not talking loud right now.
But then she was like, you know what? I don't know this guy.
I feel like things are usually loud when I play games, so I'm a lot louder.
I won't tell
But thank you for letting me know.
Asked him to send proof that the bus he was on was really empty. And so Zhu wanted to tell his friend about all the crazy stuff that had happened on the bus. He wanted to send him that photo of, the ghost arm. But also Zhu had promised the bus driver not to share this information with anyone because it could destroy this man's business. And so as he was sitting there kind of wondering how to respond, something caught Zhu's attention outside. And so he turned and looked out the window, and he saw all these people walking down the road carrying...
No, even you speaking loudly sounds muffled. I wonder why. Let me check something real quick. Huh. It's on the right one. That's weird. Oh, silly me, I never got to ask how have you been. Oh, I've been pretty good. Just been pretty busy. Tired. It's been long days. Very long days.
Carrying red lanterns. And suddenly, everything sort of clicked for Zhu. It was September 5th, which is important.
But I'm glad to be drawing.
A big event in Taiwan known as the Hungry Ghost Festival, and the people Zhu saw outside walking around with red lanterns were clearly participating in this event. This festival is celebrated every year in Taiwan,
Wait.
And it's all about
Testing. Ah. Hold on. Let me hear my voice. Okay, let me try this. Okay. Ah, ba 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 ba. It fucking sounds the same. Okay, never mind. I'll just keep it at this. Oh well. Oh!
about honoring the dead and feeding them with offerings. For example, people will burn fake money, they call ghost money, and once it gets burned, the spirits of the dead can use that money during the ghost month. People in Taiwan believe that during this ghost month, the gates of heaven and hell open up, and spirits come out and walk the earth alongside all the living, which could be a great thing, if you have a dead loved one or friend or somebody, you can reconnect with them during this event, but it also can be a bad thing because sometimes angry spirits emerge from the gates of hell and they wreak havoc on the living. And so as soon as Zhu realized that, today was the start of this Hungry Ghost Festival, he realized why the day before when he was on that bus, he realized why it was empty. Because there's this superstition in Taiwan that September 4th, the day before this festival, is the day when all the spirits are traveling around the globe. And it's believed that that day is a very dangerous day for the living to be out and about, because you don't want to come in contact by accident with, one of the evil spirits. And so nobody travels on September 4th. But Zhu had just forgotten and just believed he had struck luck by having this empty bus. But then, as Zhu was kind of working this through in his mind, he was thinking, wait a minute, all that weird stuff on the bus, the whispers, the sounds, the ghost arm reaching out of the ceiling that he got on camera, was that some sign that he had just come in contact with an evil
It's still quiet.
now in danger?
I think your volume is just down. I just checked a bit ago.
Thing I wasn't supposed to do, and now I could be paying the consequences for it. And so Zhu suddenly was like, you know what? I don't care that I made some promise to the bus driver about not disclosing this photo or what I experienced on the bus, because now this is like a me problem. Like I could have big issues. And so he decided he would send this photo to his friend and tell his friend.
This is so cute so far. Oh my god.
And so after messaging his friend wrote back that he was horrified by that photo. Seeing that arm reaching down out of the ceiling, that was horrifying. And his friend didn't know what to make of it, and did agree that, given the fact that the Hungry Ghost Festival has just started, and you were out there on the day before, like, this isn't good. You could have come in contact with an evil spirit here. But his friend also gave Zhu some advice on how to handle this. He told Zhu to take that photo and post it on Facebook. Now that sounds kind of goofy, but in Taiwan, there's this belief that if you have bad luck, the best way to deal with bad luck is to basically dilute that bad luck by sharing it with other people. It's kind of like those old email forwards that people used to pass around, like, hey, forward this email along to 5 other people or else you'll have bad luck. It was kind of like that. Like just share it with the world and, pass on your bad luck to other people, basically. And so Zhu's friend told Zhu, like, look, I know this isn't really bad luck we're dealing with here, but maybe if you just share this with the world, dilute what happened to you, maybe that will reduce the power this ghost has over you. It's worth a shot. And so Zhu posted the photo to Facebook, and it pretty much immediately went viral. Millions of people saw it, and this is what Zhu wanted. He wanted, max dilution here, show it to everybody to reduce the chances that this, entity can hurt him. But after all these people saw it, lots of people were spooked, and they began messaging Zhu, not like, don't worry, it's diluted now.
My audio output is at 76. Oh, I don't know.
But instead, they were like, hey man, you're in trouble.
Only if my mod was here, god damn it.
This ended up freaking out Zhu more than the photo did in some way. It just made the whole situation feel far more real. And so Zhu ended up deleting the photo on Facebook, setting his Facebook to private, and basically staying off social media. And then he just kind of hoped and prayed that if he did nothing and just stayed home and kind of minded his own business, that he'd be okay. And after a few days, when nothing did happen, ultimately he just told himself, I'm okay. There's no ghosts here. I'm fine. But exactly 1 week after Zhu had got off the bus, so September 11th, 2017, Zhu is in his house, he's laying on the couch, not really thinking about what had happened on the bus. And as he's scrolling social media, he comes across this headline about this horrible accident out on the highway, not far from where he lived. And it was this one vehicle that got into this huge wreck, and 6 people were killed, and 11 others were injured. I mean, it's this horrible, horrible accident. And as Zhu is like reading the article and scrolling down, he comes across a photo of the driver of this vehicle who's covered head to toe in blood. He looks totally haggard. He's standing out on this dark highway. And Zhu realizes the driver of the vehicle was the bus driver from when he had that horrible experience on the bus. It's the same guy. And so Zhu's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? He scrolls down and he realizes the vehicle that crashed was the exact same bus he had been riding in when all this stuff happened. It was the same bus driver, same bus, on the exact same route that this accident happened. And so obviously this is like a horrifying coincidence. Zhu very likely was thinking, I'm so lucky this didn't happen when I was on the bus. But when you take into context what Zhu experienced on that bus just a week earlier, the photo, the sounds, all of it, this story gets even weirder. Because the official story is the driver was negligent, and that's what caused the crash. That's it. And he actually went to jail for negligence. But there's video footage taken from inside of the bus right before it crashed, and in the final 30 seconds, something strange happens. The driver does not seem distracted at all. He's just driving along, but then something catches his attention, something off to his side. And you can tell right away he notices whatever this thing is, and he's turning, he's looking at this thing, he's not really paying attention to the road, and he starts reaching down. I mean, he's interacting with something in the bus, and you can't see it on camera. And as he gets more and more into dealing with whatever's happening over here, the bus crashes. Now, the driver never gave any public testimony about what was going on right before he crashed. All we have is the fact that it crashed, and this video footage, and Zhu's experience and that photo he took. And when you put it all together, it really makes you wonder if there was any truth to there really being some evil spirit on that bus that maybe did cause this crash. Or is it just a series of unexplainable coincidences? You be the judge. Thank you so much for watching. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And today, I'm going to tell you 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please send the like button a really nice gift basket for their birthday. But don't tell them you've doused it entirely in anthrax. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the morning of February 20th, 1881, a police officer led a search party through the woods in Hill County, Texas, which at the time was a very rural farming community with lots of dense, undeveloped woodland. The officer and the search party were looking for a father of 7 named George Arnold, who had vanished from his home 2 days earlier. The day that George had gone missing was a Sunday, and he, his wife, and their kids always went to church together on Sundays. But on that morning, George had told his family, for reasons unknown, that he actually wanted to stay home, which was very out of character for him. Nonetheless, his wife and kids had gone to church without him, and then when they had returned, George was gone. Now, there was no sign of a struggle or any issues at the house. The only clue as to where George may have gone was a letter he left behind for his wife. And in this letter, he said he had gone off into the woods.
This guy won my run. Let's go! Let's fucking go. Congrats. Now do it 10 more times.
Near the home where George lived, the lead officer is trudging through the woods. They're way off the beaten path at this point. They eventually came to this pretty decent-sized clearing. And in the middle of the clearing is this one huge tree. And at the base of the tree was George. So at this point, you need to understand that there was some nuance to the letter that George left behind for his wife. He didn't just say, "I'm going into the woods, don't follow me." He said, "I have to go into the woods." And the way the letter ended was George saying how much he loved his family and wished he didn't have to do this, but he'd given it some thought and it had to be done. Back in the woods, the Maine police officer and the search party, they see George at the base of this tree and they hustle over to him. But even before they were right on top of him, it was obvious he was dead. However, that wasn't the main sentiment as they're walking over.
I'm already on a 6 winning streak? Damn, you must be good. Damn. Or just lucky.
Oh my gosh, George is dead. Instead, it was like, what happened here? George was chained by his ankle to the tree he was sitting next to. There was a padlock on the chain. There was no way to get it off. George was also completely naked, but his clothes were sort of tattered up and sitting in a pile right next to him. And George was covered in all these scrapes and cuts, and they looked like teeth marks, but not teeth marks from animals. Teeth marks from a human's mouth. And then next to him on the ground, along with his clothes, were all these little, like, white stones. But when the officers walked over and looked more closely, they realized the white stones were actually teeth, George's teeth. And the tree that he was lying up against had all these deep gouges in it that sort of looked like if you took your own teeth and began biting into the wood to the point where you were breaking your teeth off, which is apparently what George was doing. And then also scattered amongst his teeth were many of George's fingernails, because apparently George had also been...
Sometimes you just get no good items, but you can still win. Damn, I got a skill issue. They must be really good then. I know I'd lose. Wait, where's my water? Where's my water?
raking his fingernails against this tree until he tore out his nails. And so the officers and the search party are looking at this thinking, why would he do this? This all basically looks self-inflicted. What's going on? Well, it would turn out, quite recently, something very bad happened to George. He was bit by a dog who was carrying rabies. Now, today, if you're bit by an animal that has rabies, you just get a rabies shot. You're good. It's totally curable. But in 1881, the cure didn't exist. And so if you got rabies, it was a 100% death sentence. And so very likely, shortly after getting bit by this dog, George would have begun to have early symptoms of rabies. He would have begun to feel sick and been very irritable. And also, he would have very likely begun to have some hallucinations. And for George, he apparently understood what this all meant. He had rabies, and he knew what was coming next. And he didn't want to put his family in harm's way. Now, George was a very religious guy, so he didn't believe in the idea of taking your own life. And so instead, what he did is he wrote this letter to his wife that sort of broadly explained that I have to do this and I'm so sorry. and then he went into the woods, chained himself there, and basically allowed himself to die this horrible death, where he must have been in so much agony and pain that he's doing things like biting the tree until his teeth broke off and his nails fell off. His death must have been absolutely wretched and painful, but he did it to protect his family. BetterHelp is the paid partner of today's video. You know that feeling when you know you're about to do something like a bad habit and you nothing wrong with it? The habits followed.
Hold R to get a good item if you can only win with God tier. Wait, what? What do you mean? What do you mean hold R to get good items?
I definitely found myself in that cycle of like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I stop? Well, let me just tell you, this cycle, these patterns I'm describing, BetterHelp also accepts both HSFI. There is one person in history whose name is so tied to horror that in many ways it's become sort of synonymous with evil. This person committed some of the world's worst atrocities. And in fact, they could have committed many more that we don't even know about. And part of the reason we don't know about it is because they got away with it. And even worse, they never came out and said why they did anything. There's no motive, there's no manifesto, there's virtually no communication with authorities or the public or anything. However, there is one time that this killer, for whatever reason, did reach out and communicate with somebody. And this interaction is simply known as From Hell. On the evening of October 12th, 1888, a 49-year-old businessman named George Lusk walked into his upscale home in East London. He grabbed the mail that his housekeeper had set out on the table by the door, and he began sifting through it. And at first, all he saw were a couple letters from friends, and he saw a couple of invitations to upcoming parties. And then he got to the bottom of the mail pile, and he stopped. Because at the bottom of the mail pile, there was a postcard and a letter. Over the past 2 months, 4 people had been killed in George's neighborhood. And in fact, the most recent victim was a middle-aged woman who had been killed about 2 weeks ago, really not far from George's home. And on this mail, on these 2 pieces of mail, the return address was the name of this uncaught serial killer. George was so scared of this killer, as he should be, that he had formed this neighborhood watch group to go out and try to catch this killer. And in fact, just recently, when George was just looking out his front window onto the road, just kind of looking around, not part of his neighborhood watch group, but just kind of scanning the area, he had seen this kind of sketchy looking guy with a big thick beard standing on the other side of the road, and he was kind of in this alleyway. And this guy, it looked like he was staring right at George, very intently so. And George at first returned the stare, but then felt so uncomfortable that he drew the blinds and kind of hid from his window. Because again, he's thinking, there is a killer on the loose, maybe that's him. George actually had been so scared at seeing this guy that he had actually gone to the police and filed a report and said, I don't know, I think that guy could have been the killer. But the police really couldn't do anything because all they had was a sort of generic description of some guy standing on the road not doing anything. So nothing was ever done. And so George, even though he was scared, he opened up these letters, and it was even more alarming than he could have thought. Because whoever wrote this, whether it was the killer or not, they were basically taunting George, saying, yeah, I know you stood up the neighborhood watch group. I don't care. I can do whatever I want. I can kill with impunity. In fact, I'm going to kill 2 people tomorrow night, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. George just gathered up the letter and the postcard. He left his house right away and literally ran to the police station. And when he got there, he showed them the letters and said, look, this is from the killer. It feels authentic. He's going to kill 2 people tomorrow night. You got to do something. And so the police, they took the letters and they read them, and they agreed that they did seem, authentic. But at the same time, they're like, there's really no way to tell if these are real. I mean, this could easily be a hoax. And even if this was real, what do we do? Who are the 2 people the killer's going to go after? How can we possibly protect them? George was told to go home and, just play it safe, stay home, stay inside, and let the police do their job. Over the next couple of days, George was basically sitting on pins and needles waiting to find out that, sure enough, a double homicide was committed somewhere in the neighborhood. But there was no news of any homicides. Things were calm. There was no news of the killer anywhere. And so George told
In the PC version of Isa, you can hold the R key. Oh. Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Okay.
told himself that, you know what, he was overreacting. Clearly those letters he got must have been hoaxes. But then, on October 16th, so 4 days after George received those 2 pieces of mail from the killer, he came home and he went inside, and like normal, his housekeeper had set the mail on the table right inside the house. In addition to all the paper mail, stacked on top of it was this little package, and it was wrapped in brown paper. He picks up the box, and very apprehensively he begins to unwrap it. Once it opens up, he sees there's a letter sitting on top of this box. And the letter at the top, it says, "From hell." That middle-aged woman who had been murdered just a couple of weeks earlier right near George's house, well, when she was found, one, they identified that she clearly had been killed by the same serial killer that was still uncaught. But two, she was missing something, her kidney. The package that George received inside of that box itself included half of a kidney. And then the body of the letter explained that this was the other half of that woman's kidney because the killer had eaten the other half. And this half was a gift.
Oh, shit.
The letters and the box containing that half of the kidney are considered to be potentially
Real photo from the Jack the Ripper Museum. Oh my god.
Jack the Ripper. Around 7 p.m. on May 21st, 1985, a 17-year-old boy named Jason Findlay sat on the edge of his bed in his grandmother's spare bedroom in the suburb of Scotch Plains, New Jersey. He took a deep breath and then grabbed the landline phone next to the bed and then punched in the number of the girl he had been seeing for the past couple of weeks. Jason really liked this girl. Her name was Kathy, and tonight he wanted to finally ask her to officially be his girlfriend. As the phone rang, Jason found himself staring out the window at the raging thunderstorm that was going on outside. In fact, it had been raining so hard that day that Jason and his twin cousins and his grandmother had all basically had to stay inside the whole day. Jason had actually admitted to them earlier in the week that he really wanted to call this girl Kathy and ask her to be his girlfriend, but he didn't have the nerve to do it. And they had immediately begun ridiculing him, so now stepping away to make this phone call was kind of like the first moment of peace for Jason. Jason heard Kathy pick up the phone, and when he heard her sweet voice, it was like all his thoughts of his annoying cousins disappeared from his mind, and suddenly Jason was overwhelmed with this urge to just blurt out, "Will you be my girlfriend?" He took a breath like he was about to tell her, about to finally ask her this question. But right before the words escaped his mouth, he felt this unbelievably shooting pain in the back of his head, and then everything went dark. At the same time this was happening, down the hallway in the kitchen, Jason's grandmother had just finished making dinner, and so she called out for Jason and the cousins to come set the table. The twins came into the kitchen, but a few moments went by and Jason hadn't shown up yet. So Jason's grandmother told the twins to, go down there and see what he's doing and get him in here for dinner. They walked down the hall, went into the room where Jason was, and then a moment later, Jason's grandmother screams. She rushed down the hallway, she goes into the bedroom, and she finds the twins standing over Jason, and Jason is slumped over in bed, and the phone receiver is up against his ear, but he's not moving. It sort of looked like he was asleep, but when they would shake him and yell to him, he was totally unresponsive. She picked up the phone, and she dialed 911. Not long after, an ambulance arrived at the house, and EMTs rushed in, they grabbed Jason, they put him on a stretcher, and they rushed him into the ambulance and back to the hospital. But when they got there, Jason was declared dead. Jason was 17 years old and completely healthy. And doctors, when they were
He got electric
they
shocked.
would say that there did not appear to be anything wrong with him. Nothing medically anyways. And so basically, Jason's heartbroken family was told, "We don't know what happened. He just died." But Jason's family could not accept that. The family pushed for a much more thorough forensic investigation into his death. And that's when things got weird. First, the autopsy showed basically what the doctors at the hospital first thought, which is there isn't a clear reason for why he died. And although it's very tough to accept that, it is the case that people do sometimes just die, even perfectly healthy people. However, the forensic investigator that was doing this very thorough autopsy did discover one thing that the hospital didn't find. And that was that Jason had a ruptured eardrum. Now, generally speaking, this would not have been a big, wow, we figured it out moment. However, the forensic investigator was trying to come up with all these different theories about what could have killed Jason. And when they found the ruptured eardrum paired with something else they had sort of zeroed in on, which was the weather at the time of Jason's death, they put those things together, realized they had figured it out. It would turn out, when Jason was on the phone speaking to Kathy, lightning struck the phone line outside. Electricity carried
the stream
through the phone into Jason's head, killed
Hold on.
him.
Hold on. Run that back, Kwame. Oh! Oh, wait. Okay, hold on. Damn, I should really have like a... There you go. Okay. Ah! Okay. No, we're good. Okay, I think we're good. Wait. Oh my god. Oh my god. Wait, that reminded me. Okay, wait. I have too many tabs open. Kind of stressing me out. Oh. Let me mute this. Give me a second. Okay, cool. Okay, wait. Oh my god, why did I not notice that? Oh my god. Oh my fucking god. Okay, no, my other stream is good. Holy shit, I just realized my full name is on... The application that I'm using to stream this to my computer has my full name on it. And... Okay, because whenever it crashes, it says my full name when I open up the application. So I had to check my other stream just in case, like, I wasn't paying attention. Thank God it only happened on Discord. Oh my god, I was about to freak the fuck out. Oh, that scared me. Well, we're good, we're good. Turning in Neko TV, what the cat doing? I'm drawing. Look. I have them too. I'm doing her. What it looks like. Look at that. Look, it's you. It's you. Gosh, the stream art is so cute. Thank you. That sucks. Happens in FL Studio as well. Dude, that's so stupid. That's so fucking stupid. I'm listening to Mr. Ballin. I've been turned into a keychain. Be thankful none of us were on Discord. I know. Thank fucking God. Oh my god. There was only 2 people. That's fine. I don't need like 5 people in there. Knowing.
Jason was on the phone speaking to Kathy. Lightning struck the phone line outside. The electricity carried.
See, I knew it. It was electricity. I'm smart.
As for Kathy, she would later say that she could tell Jason was almost
That's so sad.
He asked. She said yes.
Oh. Okay. Next video.
Today, I'm going to tell you 3 stories about places you can't go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into
Oh, I love this series.
if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and replace the stuffing in their pillow with peanut. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly videos. Around 4:45 p.m. on February 11th, 1995, a 50-year-old man named Eric Tollett sat in his office in the furniture factory that he owned in Northumberland, which is a pretty rural country in northern England. From inside his office, all Eric could hear outside was the thumping of the rain on the roof. There was this low-pressure system in the area which was causing a really intense thunderstorm. In fact, the storm was so bad that Eric had actually decided to close the factory for the day so all his employees could stay home during the storm. And Eric was glad he could actually afford to give his employees a day off like this, because it had not always been that way. He had bought this factory 16 years earlier, and it had taken all of his savings and scrapping together all of his money to actually make the investment. And then after he purchased the factory, it required a huge renovation to make it ready to be a furniture factory that he could actually sell products out of. But now, after 16 years of hard work, his business was quite successful. And so a day like today was no big deal. He wasn't all that concerned about the lost profits that day. Instead, he was just using the time to catch up on some admin work and also spend some time with his family. Eric's girlfriend, whose name was Leslie, was at the factory with him, hanging out in the office as well. And also Eric's brother, whose name was Donald, had taken Leslie's 8-year-old son over to the factory's attached garage to go play. But as Eric, shuffled through his paperwork and did a few things, and Leslie was over at the window looking outside, suddenly the door to his office swung open, and it was Leslie's 8-year-old son who came barging in. There's no Donald, so Eric's brother's not with him. And the son, he just looked totally panicked. And he immediately said, before Eric or Leslie could ask any questions, that Donald had collapsed over in the attached garage. Now, initially, Eric didn't really know what to make of this, but his first thought was, his brother Donald was 60, and he did have some health issues. And just hearing this kid say that Donald had collapsed, it signaled to Eric, like, oh my goodness, did Donald have a heart attack? Or he was also thinking, this kid's only 8 years old. Is he overreacting? Is there actually something totally benign happening? Whatever it was, Eric knew immediately that it was time to drop everything and run over there and chat with Donald. And so that's what he did. He and Leslie put their stuff down. They ran with the 8-year-old, through all the way to this attached garage, which, in virtue of it being attached, they never actually went outside into the storm. They just ran straight to this garage. And sure enough, when they got there, there was Donald laying on the ground. And so before Eric ran over to his brother to assess him, to see what was going on, he just stopped right in the doorway and turned to Leslie and her son, and he told them, go back to my office and call 911. I'll be in there as soon as I can. So they turned, they left, and Eric, he turned back around, rushed into the garage, and knelt down next to Donald. And right away, he could tell that his brother was not breathing, and as he's sort of feeling around for some sign of life, suddenly Eric began to feel this incredible tightness in his chest. And before he knew it, it blacked out and collapsed right next to his brother. So before Eric purchased this factory 16 years earlier, it had been a factory, but it was not a furniture factory. It was a coal factory. And in virtue of that, there was a coal mine that literally was attached to the structure. Basically, the coal would come up out of the mine and be processed inside of this, big warehouse. Now, when Eric bought it, he knew that there was this coal mine and there was this entrance to the coal mine connected to the structure. But the coal mine was not in use. The entrance to the coal mine had been completely boarded up, and it really played no role whatsoever. However, over the decade and a half that he owned this property and didn't
over that time, this poisonous gas called cookin began to develop inside the mine. And then on the day that, Eric and Donald collapsed inside the garage, well, it was because the low pressure storm outside caused those poisonous gases to rise up and seep out of the boarded up entrance. And those poisonous choke damp gases built up inside of that attached garage, basically making that entire room lethal to anybody inside of it. And so unfortunately, Donald...
Alright, I'm gonna dip and go have lunch. See you, Neko. Bye-bye! Thanks for joining. Enjoy your lunch. Your art looks great, by the way. Thank you. Oh yeah, I had some chimichangas today. That was pretty good.
At 10 a.m. on September 10th,
I love me some Mexican food.
A 68-year-old woman named Diana Stewart stood on the deck of a small boat in the Pacific Ocean, less than a mile off the eastern coast of New Zealand. She looked out at the perfectly calm, light blue water, and she saw this albatross bird flying across the sky. So she lifted up her camera and took a picture. Diana was a wildlife photographer, and she was also a member of the Nature Photography Society of New Zealand. And she, along with 9 other members of this society, had chartered this boat for a special bird watching and photography trip. And so far, the trip had lived up to the hype. They'd spent 2 hours sailing around the water, photographing all these beautiful and rare birds and other wildlife, and they'd even been lucky enough to see a couple of whales. And so this had been really a fantastic trip. Now, at this point, the group had basically finished up their trip, and they were making their way back to the shore. And so as they were going, Diana was keeping her eye out for any last-minute picture opportunities. And as she was looking around, looking for birds, she noticed something in the water. There was something huge moving sort of near the boat. It actually looked like it was moving towards the boat, sort of at an angle. And at first, she couldn't really tell what it was. But then suddenly it came into focus that it was an enormous whale. This huge whale is going to swim basically right under the boat. And so Diana, she pulled out her camera to take a photo. But then the worst thing possible happened. This whale, sure enough, came towards the boat, but it didn't go under the boat. It rammed the side of the boat. And before Diana could do anything, suddenly the boat was lurching onto its side, and she
Oh shit.
were thrown off the boat into the frigid water.
Damn.
The second she hit the freezing cold water, her life jacket, which she was
Who
wearing,
else said fuck you guys?
It's one of those auto-inflate life jackets. It inflates, and she's sort of disoriented. The water was so shockingly cold. I mean, this is a completely unbelievable situation to find yourself in. But, as she surfaced and she tried to get her bearings, she realized it was pitch black everywhere she looked, and it was so loud. She could barely hear anything but the sound of the engine of the boat. And that's when she realized, as she's putting her hands up, that the boat must have capsized and landed on top of her. But there's this little bit of air. She's basically in an air pocket, but she can't hear anything. She just hears the sound of this engine, and it's deafening. And so she began calling out for help, and she tried to kind of maneuver out from underneath, this curved underside of the boat that created this pocket, but she couldn't find her way out. And this life jacket she had on was fully inflated. She couldn't, deflate it. And because of her buoyancy, she couldn't swim down below and get out from under this boat. And so she's sort of trapped underneath this boat. It's freezing cold. The water could easily give you hypothermia in less than 30 minutes. It's total chaos. It's loud because of the engine. And so Diana's trying not to panic. And as she's sort of looking around, fumbling in the dark, gasping for air, she realized there were other people also trapped underneath. And so she's grabbing at them and trying to talk to them, and they're all panicked. She has no idea, what their state is. Are they hurt? She doesn't know. And so basically her only option at this point was just to bang on the underside of this boat, just trying to get anybody's attention outside, out from underneath where they were, to know that they were trapped under here. They needed help. And in fact, when she began knocking, there were people outside the boat, basically, who had been thrown off the boat. Everybody had been thrown off the boat. There was 11 people. 6 people were not trapped under the boat. 5, including Diana, were trapped underneath. And so as Diana is pounding the underside of the boat, the skipper of the boat, a guy named Mark, he was one of the 6 who were outside, and he clearly heard the knocking sound. And so he's obviously in a bad situation too, same as everybody else in the water. But he was in a markedly better situation because he's not trapped under this boat. And so he quickly understood that, okay, he needs to gather the 6 people he's with, kind of make sure they're okay, and then figure out how they're going to get these people trapped under the boat out. And so his first instinct was just to bang back on the side of the boat, to let them know, hey, we hear you. But again, you got to picture the scene. They are suddenly in the water because a whale flipped their boat. They have no idea if this boat's going to sink any second here. The engine is currently running, so it's super loud. The water is freezing cold. They're out in the middle of the ocean. Like, this is a true life or death situation here. But Mark, he does his best to stay calm.
Ah, yes. I really like this. I really like this. This is so cute. I like the pose for her. I mean, they're all cute, but I like the pose to her.
It's hard to
funny.
down there. I mean, there's really not much air. The water's choppy because they're moving around. It's they're gulping down water as they're doing their best to survive down there. But they just keep hitting the boat back, saying, come on, you got to get us out of here. But periodically, they'd still try to force themselves out from underneath. But again, their life jacket just made it impossible. Like, they didn't have a way out unless they ditched their life jacket. But then that's another problem. Are you really prepared to ditch your life jacket? You don't know if there's obstacles when you swim out from under. You don't know if you're even strong enough to make the swim. What happens if you get stuck down below? Like, there's all these factors that sort of forced the group under the boat to do nothing and wait and just bang the underside of the boat. And so Mark, out on the outside with his group of 6 people, including himself, they actually climbed on top of the flipped upside down boat. The boat was big enough that he knew their extra weight would not cause it to sink any further or create a worse problem for those under the water. He just knew he had to get those people out of the water to avoid hypothermia. And then once they were all up there, Mark found one of the people he was with, their cell phone, despite being submerged, was still working. And so Mark took the phone, he called authorities and said, you gotta send somebody out here right now. We have people trapped in the water. We need your help. Authorities said they would be out there as soon as possible. And sure enough, authorities were able to get out to the boat fairly quickly. And they were able to get Mark and the 5 others that were trapped on top of the capsized vessel to safety. And then divers were sent into the water and they went underneath the boat. And sure enough, the 5 others, Diana included, they were all still there. But unfortunately, all 5 were deceased.
Damn.
However, those 5 didn't die from hypothermia. They didn't die from drowning. When the boat was actually hit by the whale and capsized, it caused some of the gasoline lines to rupture. And so there was this leak in the gasoline lines, and when the boat was upside down, that leak was basically pouring into the air pocket. The dark, freezing cold, loud, awful air pocket they were in was basically filling with toxic gasoline fumes. And ultimately, 17 minutes after capsizing, all 5 died from gasoline poisoning. On Sunday, November 6th, 2022, a 21-year-old man named Yevgeny Titov walked out of his home in a small city called Zhigulovsk, which is in western Russia. Yevgeny got into his car, and then he drove about an hour and a half north to this parking lot where he parked, and then he got out and walked a few blocks to a nearby train station. When he got there, he asked the person behind the counter when the next train was going to St. Petersburg, and they told him there was one leaving soon. He bought a ticket, and then Yevgeny sat and he waited. Eventually his train rolled through, he climbed on board, took a seat, and for the next 43 hours, because St. Petersburg was 1,000 miles away, Yevgeny just sat there, basically doing nothing for nearly 2 days. He didn't bring anything with him, he had his wallet, that was it. He just sat there, just waiting to get to St. Petersburg. When they got to St. Petersburg, late on the night of Tuesday, November 8th, Yevgeny, calm as could be, stood up, left the train, and then somehow, possibly by another train or by bus or on foot, or maybe somebody gave him a ride, we don't really know, but he traveled about 15 miles south of that train station to Okolva Airport in St. Petersburg. But when he got to the airport, he didn't, board a plane like one would do at an airport. Instead, he found his way to this one very specific parking lot that was outside of the airport. Several hours later, in the early morning hours of Wednesday, November 9th, a random person was on their way through that same parking lot on the way to the airport when they started to hear something. It actually sounded like muffled screaming. And at first, they sort of chalked it up to, lots of people making their way to the airport. Maybe it's a kid, maybe it's, someone goofing around. Like, it didn't seem serious. But as they walked towards this open manhole cover, they realized that the screaming they were hearing was actually coming from inside of this hole in the ground. The screams were from Yevgeny, for reasons that we still do not fully understand. Yevgeny, after taking the manhole cover off, climbed down into this manhole, so he goes deep underground, and then when he reached the bottom of the manhole, which was, relatively wide all the way around, you could stand inside of it, there were these different offshoots of pipes that basically traveled underground. And Yevgeny got down and chose one of these pipes that was only a foot in diameter wide. It's like this pitch black, never-ending seeming tunnel. And head first, he began crawling in this tunnel. And he crawled nearly 40 feet before he finally just couldn't move any further. Keep in mind, every inch he was taking, he's basically wedging himself deeper and deeper into this pipe. It isn't like it was big and then got narrow. No, it's this narrow pipe that he forced himself through until he just could not move any farther. And it was at that point, in the wee hours of Wednesday, November 9th, that Yevgeny began to scream. And that's when the person found him. And authorities would go down inside the manhole, and somehow or another, after many hours and all the specialized equipment, they actually would somewhat unbelievably pull Yevgeny out of the pipe.
What the
and he would
fuck?
survive. Yevgeny would have to actually be hospitalized because he sustained very severe skin damage from basically thrusting.
What the
himself
fuck is
deep
wrong
into
with
the
him? Why would he do that?
He also sustained gas poisoning and hypothermia. Again, he did live. Following this ordeal, authorities would launch an investigation into what exactly happened here, because there was no clear reason why Yevgeny would have traveled all this way to go into this pipe. But when they spoke to Yevgeny after he made his recovery, after
He was
he
like,
was
I don't know.
he would just say he has absolutely no memory of doing any of it.
What the fuck?
Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you,
watching.
Mr. Ballin.
Let me know what you thought of today's episode. Today, I'm gonna
Next
share
video.
stories about real people who at some point in their lives made choices that at the time seemed sort of insignificant, but over time,
Just like cave diving.
those choices would drastically not only change their lives, but in some cases, the lives of millions and millions of other people as well. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you,
Ooh, what the
please sneak
helly?
into the Life Button's house and replace all their toilet paper with sandpaper. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. In the spring of 1986, a 22-year-old man named Will walked across the campus of the University of Missouri. Will was just a few months away from graduating from that university with a bachelor's degree in journalism. But recently, he was starting to feel like he actually didn't want to be a journalist after all. He didn't have any real passion for journalism. However, he did have passion for Hollywood movies. Will had lived in Missouri his whole life, and now he was, going to college in Missouri as well. So he was pretty sheltered, hadn't really gone anywhere. So for him, movies had sort of been like this magical portal into a different world. Hollywood would show him all these amazing places and people, and so that was his escape. He loved Hollywood movies. And so with Will's senior year coming to a close in just a few months with, real life right there on the horizon, Will sort of had this big revelation that he simply didn't want to be a journalist. And in fact, what he was going to do is just drop out of college, literally weeks away from his degree, and move to California, to Hollywood, to actually pursue being an actor in Hollywood movies. But despite Will's incredible enthusiasm and naivete, when he got to Los Angeles, to Hollywood, he realized that he was not the only young person with this big dream. There were loads of aspiring actors and actresses who loved Hollywood and wanted to break in that were here, basically competing for all the same roles in all the same films. Now, this didn't deter Will. I mean, he wasn't totally shocked. Of course, people wanted to be big movie stars and come out here and try their hand. And so he went out and auditioned constantly. He didn't care what movie it was. He wanted to be in one, but he just was not getting the work. Nobody was picking him up. He was auditioning and being rejected over and over and over again. And Will was okay with that. He figured, okay, I'll get better and eventually get cast for something. But the problem was his finances. It was expensive to live in Los Angeles, and there really weren't all that many jobs available. I mean, during the day, Will really wanted to focus on just auditioning constantly. And so the only work he could reasonably take was sort of side gigs that he could work late at night or early in the morning. Except, again, there's so many people trying to do what Will is doing.
What are you watching? I'm watching She Lived Through a Nightmare.
Aspiring actors and actresses, that basically all the side gigs in LA were sort of already taken. And so the only ones that were available to Will were like the bottom of the barrel side gigs, the ones nobody wanted. But, Will was determined, and he was okay taking whatever was available. And so he ultimately got 2 jobs. He worked as a mascot for a fast food chicken restaurant, where he basically would stand outside in a chicken suit and try to encourage people to go into the restaurant. And then at night, he would work as a limo driver, but for a very specific group of people. He was a limo driver for strippers who would go mostly to bachelor parties, and it was Will's job to drive them to and from these parties, and then also to go in with them and, sort of be the DJ, play some music for them. And then at the end of the night, he was in charge of picking up all the money and clothes that were kind of strewn about from the event, and packaging it all up, putting everybody and everything back in the limo, and driving him back home again. Now, at first, Will just sort of accepted that this was his life, because eventually it was not going to be his life. He was going to break into Hollywood, and he wouldn't have to wear the chicken suit or drive the strippers around anymore. He could just be an actor, and he could do the thing he really wanted to do. But pretty quickly, Will realized that the opportunity to break in just wasn't really happening. But what was really happening is he was spending a lot of his time being the chicken suit guy and driving strippers around, because he had to pay his bills, and these jobs didn't pay very much, and so he had to kind of encroach on the daytime hours and work more hours during that time that he would like to be auditioning just to pay his bills. And then when he would audition, he just continued not to get cast. And so before long, it just sort of felt like he was working these 2 kind of awful jobs all the time, barely sleeping, so that he could just get rejected over and over and over again and not break into Hollywood? It was depressing. And ultimately, what he decided to do was, you know what? I'm going to quit one of my jobs. He decided he would quit the limo stripper job and just do the chicken suit job to buy a little bit more time during the day.
Chicken suit!
Audition a little bit more, and for a little while, he would just put all of his effort into that and hopefully land a big spot. And if he didn't, well, then his big dream likely was not going to pan out, and he'd have to move back home. But on Will's final shift as a stripper driver, one of the strippers actually said something to him that totally changed his life. He was driving him around on their way to bachelor parties, doing this and that, and at some point, Will struck up a conversation with this woman. She was a stripper, but during the day, she too was trying to become an actress. Stripping was her side gig to make enough money to live in LA to try to break into the industry. It wasn't going great for her, but she was enthusiastic and committed the same way Will was. And over the course of this conversation, she told Will that, in addition to auditioning and, working when you had to, you should also take this particular acting class. There's this one great class that all the biggest and best aspiring actors and actresses are taking, and lots of very successful actors and actresses have taken. Like, this is the one to get into. You really ought to divert some of your time during the day to go into this class. And for Will, he appreciated the input, but he's thinking, like, that's not really going to help me. Right now, I I don't need to learn how to act. That's going to take way too long. Like, I don't need that. I need
He
big
needs
action.
it.
I
He
need to
no.
audition. I need to just be given a
He
role,
sucks.
and then my
He needs
training
help.
will be on the job. I'll learn by acting, not by training to act. However, he's also thinking to himself as he's driving around all night and she's talking about how great this class is, that he's like, you know what? At the same time, though, my auditions have not gone well. Nothing's really going well. And so maybe I'll just go to this class once. I mean, she's going to be there. She wants me to go. I'll go with her. I'll go one time. You know, maybe it'll be good for me. And so he agrees to go. And so not long after this final shift where he has this sort of pivotal interaction with the stripper, he goes to the acting class. And, you know, the stripper is there and she's so excited to see him. And, you know, he makes his way in and he sits down. And at some point during the class, the instructor says, okay, we're going to pair you up with other people in the class and you're going to act out a scene in front of everybody else. And so Will, he randomly gets paired up with this other actor who, in fact, had a real audition that night. The scene they were going to act out was actually going to be done in front of actual agency reps who had come to this class. They were there literally to see this other actor do this particular scene. Will was just being asked to basically play support and allow this other actor to do their scene and hopefully get the part. And Will knows this. He's like going into this with, okay, I'm going to read these lines and you're...
I love how you declare she looks so gorgeous in your style. Thank you. Thank you.
going to kind of be the one really auditioning here. And it'll be in front of the whole class. It'll be, you know, both cool to see a real audition and good exposure to the folks that are in the class. And so they do this scene, and Will, who really is just trying to play a good supporting person here, is so unbelievably talented. He's so into the scene. His emotions come through so beautifully that he completely overshadows the other actor. Like, he completely destroys them and comes out looking like the star that really he thought he was. And the agency reps were so blown away by it, they actually didn't cast the other actor who was supposed to be auditioning for this role. They basically said, no, we're not interested in you. We're going to cast Will in this role. Will basically stole the role from this other actor. And this moment would end up being so talked about and so iconic that this virtual nobody stole the show and landed this role, that people began talking about Will in Hollywood. And wouldn't you know it, it led to his big break. Will began getting cast left and right as the lead actor, the starring role in Hollywood hit after Hollywood hit. Today, Will is one of the most famous and celebrated movie stars to have ever lived. He's won everything from Academy Awards and Golden Globes to People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. Will is his first name, but he's better known by his middle name, Brad Pitt.
Oh, I didn't know that.
In early April of 1945, a 15-year-old girl named Etta curled up on a pile of blankets inside the basement of her aunt's house in Velp, which is a small town in the Netherlands. Etta's stomach hurt so badly, and she felt weaker than she ever had in her whole life. And this was because she was quite literally on the brink of starving to death. Etta was 5 foot 6 inches tall.
God, I hate drawing
Her
ears.
weight had plummeted to just 88 pounds. She couldn't walk, she couldn't stand, and she could barely speak. She was probably within a couple of days of actually dying. And despite the fact that, you know, her aunt and her mother were right down there with her in the basement, along with some other refugees that her family was housing in the basement with them, nobody had food to give her. And so as much as they wanted to help her, they couldn't. And on top of that, making this already terrible situation even worse, you know, Etta, her family, and the refugees had literally been trapped down here in this basement, you know, for months because it was way too dangerous to go outside. It's part of the reason they couldn't get food. Going outside was a death sentence in and of itself, because World War II was raging right outside. Bombs are being dropped, people are being shot, explosions left and right. I mean, they're totally trapped. So the country where Etta lived, the Netherlands, had been under Nazi occupation for almost 5 years at this point. When the Nazis had first taken over, Etta had been this strong, very energetic girl with dreams of becoming a professional ballet dancer. She'd been so young when the occupation began that she hadn't fully understood what was even happening. But then, Etta's uncle, who was a prominent anti-Nazi activist, had been captured and executed by the Nazis. And this really spurred Etta into action. I mean, she saw how serious this really was, and she was not just going to stand idly by. And so she had spent several years working with an anti-Nazi group called the Dutch Resistance, doing things like, performing ballet at secret fundraising events to try to raise money for this anti-Nazi movement, and also smuggling resistance newspapers all over the country. She'd even convinced her family to take in refugees and hide them from the Nazis, even though she knew that if she and her family were caught, they would all be killed. And all of this had given Etta a real sense of purpose. She felt like she was actually doing something tangible to fight the Nazis. However, about 9 months earlier, the Nazis had cut off supply lines into the Netherlands, and since then, the entire country had been completely devastated. People had basically no food, they had zero access to medicine, running water, or electricity, and so Etta, like many other people in this country, had begun to starve. And she'd gotten so sick and so weak that as she was starving, she couldn't do any work with the resistance at all anymore. All she could do was literally just lie in this basement and effectively wait to die. And that particular day, as she listened to the sound of planes, gunshots, and sirens going off outside, Etta prayed to God for help. But the only response she got was a high-pitched whistling sound, then a deafening blast. The floor shook, glass shattered, and everything went black. Sometime later, we don't know exactly how long, probably days, Etta came to. And unbelievably, as she looked around, despite effectively her basement being the target of a bombing run, she looked around and saw the basement's structural integrity had effectively held up, and her loved ones and the refugees and she were all still alive. But, Etta, she was not like, oh, great, everything's fine now, or like, okay, the Nazis are getting closer. And if they bombed us just now, I'm bound to be bombed again, or I'm going to starve to death, like the end is right on top of us. But as she kind of looked around and continued to take stock of the situation, she realized something was very different. Over the last several weeks and months, the constant bombardment of bombs and guns and sirens and chaos outside was near constant. But right now, even though they've just recently been bombed and barely survived, like the Nazis must be right on top of us, despite that, she's listening, and she can't hear anything outside. There's no explosions, no gunfire, nothing. It's quiet. Etta and her family were much more confused than anything else. But eventually, they worked up the courage, and, with the help of her mother literally carrying Etta, the group of them, along with the refugees, walked out of the basement to see what was going on outside. And when they got up there, what they found were the streets were full of Allied soldiers. And they saw Dutch people crying and hugging, saying it was all over. And that's when Etta, her family, and the remaining refugees that were with them realized the Allied soldiers had liberated their city. For the first time in nearly 5 years, they were now free from Nazi occupation. If that bomb had struck more directly on their basement, or if the war had simply gone on for even just one more day, Etta could have very easily died in that basement. Instead, she survived. Sort of against all odds, she survived. Shortly after coming out of the basement, the Allied powers didn't just liberate that city where Etta lived. They fully eradicated the Nazis across Europe. The Allies won, and World War II finally ended. And Etta, who basically shouldn't be alive at this point, went on to have this unbelievable post-war life. Before the war, Etta had dreamed of becoming a professional ballet dancer. But during the war, she had suffered all these injuries and really had been affected by malnutrition, and it left her with long-term health problems that effectively made dancing full-time not a possibility. So instead, she began modeling and acting, and eventually she moved to Hollywood. And in 1953, so 8 years after nearly being blown up by the Nazis and starved to death by the Nazis, Etta starred in a movie called Roman Holiday. And she actually won an Academy Award for her performance, even though World War II had taken a lot from Etta and her family. I mean, it had nearly killed her, and it also took away her dream of being a ballet dancer. Despite that, experiencing the war so intimately like she had been forced to, it had instilled this incredible poise and discipline and a real quiet strength in her that would make her one of the most successful actresses of all time. Etta was actually just her nickname, and when she started making it big in Hollywood, she abandoned it and began going by her full name, Audrey Hepburn.
Oh! Wow, I'm learning a lot today. Did you just burp? No. Wait, did I? I don't know. I think I just made a weird sound.
One morning in the summer of 1889, a 36-year-old surgeon named William Halstead and his head nurse, 27-year-old Caroline Hampton, stood in an operating room prep area in the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Halstead was the surgeon-in-chief of this hospital, and that morning, he and Caroline were getting ready for a surgery. Now, Dr. Halstead had already washed up and was prepped, and now he was watching Caroline very closely to make sure she followed his hygiene requirements exactly. Caroline stood in front of a row of sinks, all filled with different cleaning agents. She started by washing her hands with scalding hot water and medical-grade antibacterial soap. Then she cleaned her nails with brushes and files. Then she dipped her hands in acid. And then she finally finished with a 5-minute soak in a highly corrosive liquid called mercury bichloride. Dr. Halstead ran a really tight ship, specifically when it came to hand washing. This was the process he believed was the safest. And Dr. Halstead's theory that basically nuking your hands with cleaning agents before doing anything in the medical field actually made him sort of unique at the time, because this was 1889, and hand washing was just not very common, not even in hospitals. Germ theory, which is the idea that illnesses can spread by germs that we can't see, and they're all over us, on our hands in particular, and so we have to kill the germs to prevent the spread of illness, right? That
this
theory, germ
not the germs, not the
very
germs.
new at the time. And truthfully, a lot of doctors at the time didn't believe in germ theory, which meant they didn't do things which we would now consider standard hygiene practice in hospitals, like, basic hand washing and regular...
Thanks again for drawing. My OCs are coming out so cute. Time for the chicken person to go to bed now. See you around. Thank you for joining. I'm glad you're liking it so far. They're all so cute. Here, I'll zoom into the keychain for you. Why is Echo bending so low right now? It's like she's looking for something. But good night. Good night. I'll see how much I'll color. I'll show you the results later after I'm done streaming.
disinfecting tools and surfaces. And Dr. Halstead was a huge proponent of germ theory and aggressive hand washing. And so he had instituted this whole multi-step awful hand washing routine for his whole surgical team at Johns Hopkins. And the results had actually been fantastic. He had one of the lowest surgical mortality rates in the whole country. But despite that, people still sort of thought Dr. Halstead was crazy, including his own staff who, complained about these highly corrosive cleaning materials that they were rubbing all over their hands all the time. Like even if this worked, like this was kind of awful. But despite that, Dr. Halstead was not about to change his protocol. He knew it worked, even if it hurt. But that particular day, as Dr. Halstead and Caroline sat there letting their hands air dry after dipping them repeatedly in acid, he couldn't help but notice when he looked over at Caroline that her hands and her forearms looked really bad. Like they were blistered and just totally damaged from clearly doing this process all the time. And Dr. Halstead, he just sort of felt bad about it. And the reason he felt bad about it was sort of twofold. One, Caroline never complained, even though obviously every day when she would do this procedure that he is forcing on her, She was hurting herself in the process, but she never complained. And so that's actually why he had elevated her to head nurse, because he thought she had such grit and determination and she believed in the process, and so he had made her head nurse. But the other and more prominent reason why Dr. Halstead felt sort of bad about Caroline in particular and the condition of her hands and forearms was because Dr. Halstead was secretly totally infatuated with Caroline. Now, he had never told her that. This was something he kept completely inside because he, one, thought he was too old for her, and two, he just kind of assumed that she would never be interested in him. So he just carried this intense love of Caroline and was very protective of Caroline, but she didn't really know. And so that was why when he looked over and saw her clearly in pain but not complaining, that because of his love for her, Dr. Halstead really for the first time began to question his big hygiene process. He knew it worked, but at what cost? His beloved Caroline was suffering because of him. And worse, he was sort of trapped. He would love to tell her that she didn't have to do that. Let your skin heal. I'm so sorry, Caroline. But if he did that, if he made an exception for her and said, don't follow this process anymore, people would find out and it would totally undermine his credibility. His whole thing is he's like, everyone must follow this process to stop the spread of germs and stop the spread of illnesses. Everybody's got to do this. And so if he didn't make her, what does that say about him? And so as he's sitting there watching Caroline dutifully get ready for surgery, Dr. Halstead, for the first time, really began seriously considering if there was any way, any sort of workaround that maybe could lessen the pain for Caroline, just because he loved her. That was it. It wasn't a safety thing. It was just because he loved Caroline. But despite putting some real thought and energy into trying to come up with something to lessen the burden on Caroline, he just couldn't find a solution. All his solutions involved her not following the process, which he couldn't do. Fast forward to early 1890. So about a year after Dr. Halstead first really began considering how can he help Caroline not hurt her hands anymore. So about a year after that began to be a thing for him, and he's in his office and he's looking at his desk, and on his desk is this small package. And he hasn't opened it yet, but he's so excited. He's also kind of nervous, but he feels like this is it. This is the thing I've been waiting for. So over the past year, Dr. Halstead had continued to iterate on how can I help Caroline? How can I keep her from hurting herself? And eventually he had this huge epiphany. He came up with this sort of outside the box concept and he pitched it to a company and said, hey, can you help me make these? And now sitting in front of him on the desk was effectively the prototype of this strange thing he had come up with, which again was just to help his love, Caroline. And so Dr. Halstead took a deep breath, he walked over and he ripped open the package, and inside were these two strange looking objects. And he picked them up, and without any hesitation, Dr. Halstead took the two objects, he left his office, hustled down the hallway to the OR prep room where he finds Caroline. And she's getting ready to wash her hands, for an upcoming surgery. And he stops her and says, here, and he hands her the two objects, and he says, don't wash your hands. Just use these. And with a confused look, with her bloody and blistered hands, she took the two objects and said, okay. 1 week later, and already Caroline's hands and forearms were healing up beautifully. And also, Dr. Halstead, over the course of this week, was so excited about his prototype and the progress that he was clearly seeing in Caroline's skin condition that he finally worked up the nerve to tell Caroline how much he loved her. And Caroline would actually tell him that, believe it or not, I'm in love with you too. And before long, Dr. Halstead proposed to Caroline and they got married. However, it was not their love that sort of was remembered for generations to come. Instead, the only reason we know about these two is because of that prototype that Dr. Halstead came up with, what he gave to Caroline that ultimately saved her skin. It was the perfect workaround to his hygiene hand washing process. In fact, these objects that he created were so effective that he and everybody else basically in medicine across the world began to use these brand new tools. And so it is almost entirely because of one man's love for a woman that we now have arguably the most used medical tool in the world. Dr. Halstead inadvertently created the world's first ever rubber surgical gloves. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have Hey guys, today we have a really special video for you. So if you haven't already heard, we just released our second graphic novel, Where Nightmares Live, and it's available wherever books or audiobooks are sold. And what better way to get you guys a little sneak peek of this incredible piece of art than to tell you one of the new stories that is in this book. Again, our second graphic novel, Where Nightmares Live, is out right now wherever books are sold, so grab your copy today and follow along. And remember, your nightmares are waiting.
Today's story is a good old-fashioned ghost story. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button has a big international flight planned, offer to buy them some snacks for the ride. But don't tell them your snacks are made entirely of Olestra, and they're laced with laxatives. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the night of January 3rd, 1804, a 22-year-old man named Thomas Millwood sat inside of a local pub in Hammersmith, England, feeling totally annoyed. Now, normally, Thomas was a very upbeat and social person. He worked as a bricklayer, and basically every day after work, he would meet up with his friends at this pub. They would have some drinks and share stories and laugh. It would be a great time. But tonight, it was like everything annoyed Thomas, especially his friends. And as his friends droned on and on about the current drama going on in their town, Thomas finally had just had enough, and before he could stop himself, he stood up and slammed his beer mug down on the table, and right away Thomas knew he had overdone it, because immediately the pub went deadly silent, his friends all stopped, everybody's looking over at Thomas, and Thomas kind of muttered an apology, and then quickly grabbed his coat, he stood up, and just began walking like he was going to leave the pub. And the pub, again, is totally silent as he's walking, and then right as he's about to go out the door, his friends broke the tense silence in the pub, and they called out to him and said, "Hey, be careful out there." And Thomas just looked at his friends and kind of rolled his eyes and said, "Yeah, okay," and then he went outside. Thomas decided he would walk to his parents' house, which was not far away, and he would just sit by the fire and warm up for a bit before he had to go back out later that night to meet up with his wife. His wife worked long hours, and she often worked late, and when she worked late, Thomas would meet her at work and escort her back home, and that's what he was doing tonight. And so Thomas began walking down Black Lion Lane, and per usual, Thomas was basically one of the only people outside. Hammersmith used to be this very friendly and bustling place. It was home to 45,000 people. It was located right on the outskirts of London, and lots of rich people like to go there to vacation. But recently, there had been a string of all these increasingly bizarre sightings, or attacks as people were calling them, in Hammersmith, and it had all the residents completely on edge to the point where people were not going outside. Now, Thomas thought it was totally ridiculous and thought people were completely overreacting, and so he had been doing his best to ignore the drama going on in town, but it was getting harder and harder to do that. As Thomas rounded a corner, he nearly walked into two men that were walking the other direction, and when Thomas looked up to say he was sorry, one of the men screamed, "Get back!" and he was holding a club in his hand, and the other guy had a pistol in his waist, and he had his hand on the pistol grip. Thomas instinctively threw his hands up to show he was not a threat, at which point the man lowered his club, and the other guy took his hand off his pistol, and one of them said to Thomas, "Hey, it's dangerous to be out here alone. You should not be out here by yourself." And then before Thomas could say anything to them, they quickly walked past him and disappeared around the corner. By now, Thomas was only a few houses away from his parents' house, and so he just kind of brushed off the incident and sped walked his way to his parents' house, kind of cursing the two men under his breath for their ridiculous warning about how dangerous it was out here. A minute later, Thomas arrived at his parents' house, and he walked up to the door, and normally his parents would keep the door unlocked, but when he tried it, it was locked, and then a second later, he heard his sister, Anne, inside the house coming to the door, and she called out through the door, "Who's there?" And Thomas is like, "It's me, Anne." But apparently that was not enough, and Anne called through the door, "Well, I don't know if it's really you, so back up so I can see you through the peephole." Thomas rolled his eyes, but he did what his sister asked. He stepped back and allowed her to see his whole person through the peephole, at which point he heard Anne fumbling with the lock. The door was unlocked. She opened it up. Thomas stepped inside, and his sister immediately shut and locked the door behind him. And her first question to Thomas was, "Well, did you see it?" Thomas immediately wished he had not come to his parents' house to avoid talking about this stupid topic, but he realized that if he had gone back to his house, he likely would have gotten the same question from his mother-in-law, who lived with him and his wife. Because actually, it didn't really seem to matter where you went in Hammersmith or who you talked to, because the conversation was always going to be the same. It was going to be about these attacks, because the people of Hammersmith were absolutely convinced these attacks were being committed by a ghost. It all started about 2 months earlier when somebody spotted this mysterious figure lurking in the church cemetery. And Thomas thought really the hysteria should have stopped right then and there, because only a couple of days after the sighting, it was figured out that the figure was actually just the butcher's son, and he was just dressing up in women's clothes, walking around in the cemetery to scare his friends. It was a prank, that was it. But the hysteria in town did not go away, because a week after this first weird sighting, there was another sighting in the cemetery. A local chimney sweep said he saw someone walking around in the cemetery who disappeared into the ground. Now, admittedly, a lot of people in Hammersmith, when they heard about this second sighting, they did kind of brush it off as just hysteria. But it was after this second sighting that the so-called attacks began in town. Late one night, a local resident was walking past the cemetery when something came up behind them and began choking them, and this resident was able to break free and run away to safety, but they turned and got a look at whatever was attacking them, and they described it as a phantom. Shortly after that, a local carriage driver was going past the cemetery when they got out for some reason, and then this creature with horns on its head came charging out and confronted the carriage driver, who apparently just turned and ran away, abandoning his 8 horses and 16 passengers. And so by late December, there had been so many more of these strange attacks and weird sightings in town that basically everybody in Hammersmith, save for basically Thomas, was totally gripped by fear. And as terror kind of spread across town, Thomas had attempted to convince his wife and mother-in-law and his family that there was just no way this was a real ghost. This is people's paranoia and their imaginations running wild. That's all this is. But Thomas's theory was really put into question when just a few days earlier, so a few days before he stormed out of the pub because he was so annoyed, somebody had died following one of these attacks. A pregnant woman had died. The woman had been walking alone near the church cemetery at about 10 p.m. at night when something in the cemetery had rose up out of the ground, rushed over to her, and grabbed onto her, and she barely had time to kind of turn and look, and she saw this kind of white flowing robe and a long pointed white hat, and that was all she remembered, because then she passed out. Then she woke up again and she was in somebody's house and her neighbors were all around her. They had found her passed out in the cemetery and carried her there. And so she comes to, and she's only able to choke out the story of what happened to her, the ghost attack, before she died. And so following this pregnant woman's death, the town of Hammersmith offered a reward for anybody who could capture or kill the ghost, which was now being dubbed the Hammersmith Ghost. The night watchmen began doing extra patrols. In fact, those 2 men that Thomas had turned the corner and bumped into, one guy had the club, the other guy had a gun, those guys were on their own patrol. And so the ghost and how to capture or kill it was basically the only thing people in Hammersmith wanted to talk about, and it totally annoyed Thomas. It was what was being talked about at the pub by his friends when he got so mad he slammed the cup down and left the pub. To Thomas, the idea of capturing or killing a ghost made no sense, because a ghost is not real. Now, by this point, the butcher's son had come out and said, "Look, I didn't do any of these other attacks. That's not me. I only did the first one." And he had an alibi to prove it. But to Thomas, this didn't rule out that the ghost was not a person. To Thomas, he just felt like, okay, then there's somebody else in town that's just copying the butcher's son's prank, except obviously they've taken the pranks too far because they've gotten someone killed. At about 10 p.m., Thomas was inside of his parents' house, sitting by the fire, just kind of beginning to doze off. And as he sat there, he thought to himself how little he wanted to go out into the freezing cold night to go walk with his wife all the way back home. He'd much rather just stay here and sleep for the night and let his wife walk home on her own. But when he floated this idea to his sister Anne, who was standing nearby, she exploded on him and was like, "Are you kidding me? You're going to let your wife walk home alone in this environment? She's going to be the next victim of the Hammersmith ghost. Get out there and protect your wife." Thomas was like, okay. And he got up, he grabbed his jacket, and he walked outside. As soon as Thomas was outside, he was feeling so annoyed at the current situation that he found himself thinking, you know what? If I run into that stupid Hammersmith ghost, the person disguised as a ghost, I'm gonna bum rush them and beat them up. And it will prove to the entire town that there was never any ghost. It was just a person the whole time. And so Thomas began walking briskly down the road. He turned onto Black Lion Lane, and immediately he saw this big bush off to the side of the road on the sidewalk, and he could have sworn behind this bush there was something or someone crouched down, like they were trying to hide. And so Thomas stopped and he squinted in the direction of this bush, and then at some point he saw movement enough to confirm to him that that must be a person back there, and suddenly it clicked for Thomas. That must be the person pretending to be this ghost. That's the prankster slash murderer. There they are. And so without any hesitation, Thomas balled up his fists and just started sprinting towards this person. At virtually the exact same time, Anne, Thomas's sister, was still in their parents' house, and she was looking out the window kind of roughly in the direction that Thomas had gone, and she heard this loud scream that sounded like a man. Now, she couldn't see her brother, but she's thinking, you know, oh my God, it's coming roughly from the area where he went. What if he's getting attacked by the ghost? And so she bolted outside. Just a couple of minutes after that, a big posse of men came tumbling out of that pub where Thomas had been drinking earlier that night and got really mad and slammed his cup down. So they come stumbling out of the pub, and they were being led not by the night watchman, who was amongst the posse, but instead they were being led by the town's tax collector, a man named Francis Smith, who looked totally disheveled and out of breath and did not look like the type of guy who would be leading a big posse. But here we were. He was leading this posse, and he took them down the road, and they turned the corner onto Black Lion Lane, and as soon as they looked down that same road that Thomas had been on and then seen the person in the bush, the posse, they stopped because they saw a body in the middle of the road, and it didn't appear to be moving. And then crouched over the body was this dark figure that was kind of hunched over this body. And the figure turned and it looked at the posse and let out this unbelievable scream. And the posse just kind of backed up and didn't know what to do. But then the night watchman broke ranks and just began sprinting at the creature that was perched over the body. And the watchman tackled the creature onto the ground and kind of pinned it there. At the same time, the rest of the posse, seeing an opening, rushed over to the body in the road to see if maybe they were alive and if maybe they could help this person. But unfortunately, when they got to the body, they could tell this person was dead. The posse believed they had just discovered the latest victim of the Hammersmith ghost and the Hammersmith ghost themselves, the black creature that the watchman tackled onto the ground. But they were wrong. When Thomas had rounded the corner onto Black Lion Lane and he looked into that bush and he saw that figure moving around, it really was a person. It was not a ghost, it was a human being. It was Francis Smith, the town's tax collector, and he was hiding behind the bush. However, Francis was not hiding behind the bush because he was pretending to be the Hammersmith ghost, like Thomas was assuming, which is why he ran after him. Instead, Francis was hiding behind that bush because he was basically laying in wait for the Hammersmith ghost. He was hoping the ghost would walk past him and he could run out and capture or kill this thing and get the reward. Basically, Francis was doing the same thing Thomas was doing. The only difference was Francis actually believed in the ghost and Thomas did not. And it was just Thomas's bad luck that that night he had chosen to wear his all-white work clothes, which to Francis, who's hiding in the bush, terrified and waiting for the ghost, you know, he sees Thomas in these white clothes and he was absolutely convinced he was the Hammersmith ghost. And so when the two men spotted each other, they both attacked, except Francis had a rifle. And so when Thomas ran up to him to basically punch him in the face, Francis just raised his gun and fired. And the bullet hit Thomas directly in the face, which killed him instantly. But after shooting and killing Thomas, Francis had no idea that it was a real person. He was so jacked up on adrenaline that he did think he shot the ghost, but didn't know if the ghost was actually dead or not, and he didn't want to be alone when he checked, so he just turned and ran to the pub, gathered up the posse, and said, "Hey, I got the ghost, come on!" And they all ran back to Black Lion Lane, and when they got there, Thomas's sister, Anne, who heard that scream, she had made it to her brother's body, and she was the creature crouched over him, screaming out of grief. That's all she was doing. She had just found her dead brother and was reacting to it when the watchman tackled her to the ground. But luckily, the posse quickly realized this is not a ghost, this is Thomas and his sister, and so his sister was not harmed. And so, on January 11th, 1804, Francis Smith was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. But 5 weeks later, the King of England would pardon Francis and shorten his sentence to just 1 year. The Hammersmith ghost incident was debated for more than 150 years, and ultimately it led to a modern-day ruling that says a person is allowed to use self-defense if they truly and reasonably believe they're in danger, even if they are wrong about the danger they face. The true identity of the Hammersmith ghost, not the very first one, which we know was the butcher's son, but all the other instances, all the other attacks, well, it would turn out it was the town's shoemaker who would confess to his crime following Thomas's murder. He would tell people that the only reason he did it was to get revenge on his apprentices who had really badly scared his children by telling them ghost stories.
Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments, and